Welcome back to Boom and Bust. My special guest today is Monsieur Yves Giroux. He is the Parliamentary Budget Officer of Canada. Yves, you talked about the guardrail, and maybe we should unpack that a little bit for our audience. You mentioned that there are various aspects of this fiscal guardrail that are no longer operable. So maybe just take us through what the guardrails are and how that impacts our economy and our government.
Sure. So the government, I think it's in budget 2023 or the fall economic statement of 2023, indicated that it aimed at meeting three fiscal or respecting three fiscal anchors. The first one was deficit that are no higher than $40 billion in 23-24. The second one is a declining debt to GDP ratio over time. So presumably each and every year, but at least in the medium term. And the third one, is to maintain deficits as a share of the economy. So deficit to GDP ratio, no higher than 1%, starting in 2026-27 and in the years after that. So when the government, we can't say the minister now, because it wasn't clear who was the minister on that day when the fall economic statement was tabled on December 16th, but the government clearly indicated that the deficit for 2023-24 was $61.9 billion, way above its stated goal of $40 billion. So that fiscal anchor was blown. The second two fiscal anchors, 1% of deficit of lower than 1% of GDP in 26-27 and onward, and declining debt as a share of the economy. These ones are still holding true, but barely. The deficit as a share of GDP in 26-27 and after, according to current fiscal plans, it will be at 0.9%. And that's before considering additional spending on national defense, potential enrichments to government programs, or even a response to the tariffs. The third fiscal anchor, declining debt to GDP ratio, it's also barely moving, especially in the first few years. So if we were to see a contraction of the economy as a result of tariffs or another shock or significant new government spending, then the deficit or the debt rather as a share of the economy would stop declining and it could reverse that trend and start increasing again. So all three fiscal anchors, there are two that remain. The first one has been blown, and the other two are at risk of being unmet.
And if those are unmet, those anchors, Yves, does that affect interest rates or the cost of borrowing? How does that affect the economy?
It's not clear what would the immediate impact be. What it would affect and does affect is the fiscal credibility of the government. One thing that's important to keep in mind is that these fiscal anchors are not imposed by external institutions or the markets. They're self-imposed anchors by the government of Canada. So the government indicated that these were its three fiscal targets, the three guiding principles to determine the trade-offs between spending and taxation and expenditure reductions. So when you have the government itself saying, these will be my three guiding principles, and they drop one, and the other two are at risk of being unmet, then it undermines the credibility of subsequent fiscal documents. For example, if the government says, we will aim for deficits of that magnitude going forward, when they have a history of dropping their own fiscal anchors, investors, markets, and Canadians can cast doubt on statements of that nature.
Gotcha. I think you've also mentioned that the government's economic scenarios downplay the risks facing taxpayers. If I'm not mistaken, is that actually one of your concerns?
Yes, we didn't word it exactly like that, but
Okay.
in essence, that's what we said. We indicated, for example, that the government has mentioned down a pessimistic scenario, but at the time of the statement in mid-December, it was known that the U.S. administration was threatening with tariffs. But
Right.
the pessimistic scenario in that document was only very mildly pessimistic, a far cry
Gotcha.
from what could credibly happen should the U.S. administration move forward with tariffs, for example.
Yves, we're going to take another break. We'll be back with you after these messages.